As today's talk, I'm almost echoing what has been already appearing for today. So I would say maybe there are two missing pieces in the current literature on mindfulness. In some fields, such as clinical psychology, there has been a tendency to see mindfulness practices as non-analytical and also non-interpersonal practices that revolve around cultivating attention to the present moment or breath, or non-judgmental awareness. In some way, this is, as I'm echoing with the previous speakers, slightly limited take on this mindfulness, because the term mindfulness in the traditional Buddhist context also means recollection, memory. So that is one. Also, this kind of analytical form of mindfulness practices that require intensive cognitive reflections are actually quite commonly practiced in many Buddhist traditions. And thirdly, kind of practicing on this attention to the present moment doesn't necessarily require interpersonal practice. But again, many Buddhist practices on mindfulness are highly interpersonal. My second point is that there is a tendency to treat mindfulness as independent of cultural context, even though actually any mindfulness practices comes from the cultural beliefs, values, and that is also stemming from the certain understanding about mental health and all of that. So to address these issues, today I would like to talk about Japanese practice of Naikan, that is analytical form of mindfulness practice that is actually aiming at gaining insight. And this Japanese-born practice has been also exported to Europe and North America. So Naikan actually literally means introspection or inner looking. Nai means inside, kan means introspection. So this is actually discursive and analytical method of structured self-reflective that helps people to gain new insight into themselves, their relationships, and the causes of problems these people are facing. Naikan was developed by the late Buddhist practitioner Yoshimoto Isshin back in 1941. He himself was a serious Buddhist practitioner, and apparently he attained awareness or enlightenment through the former version of Naikan that was embedded within the Shin Buddhist traditional practice. So he made it much more accessible to many people, and he named it this Naikan. The Buddhist form of the former style of Naikan was actually no eating, no drinking, no sleeping until you attain enlightenment. So clearly that had to be changed. If you go to the Naikan Center nowadays, there are 3 meals, you can sleep, and you can drink. So the places people can go to experience Naikan are actually not just one kind. Most of the Naikan centers are taking place at the home of the Naikan practitioners. But there are hospitals that offer Naikan practice as a form of, in this case, psychotherapeutic method. There's many Buddhist temples that also offer Naikan. But also actually Naikan is offered in juvenile detention centers, prisons, and school classrooms. The time frame, actually everyday schedule of Naikan is quite similar to Vipassana, Morning begins quite early. 5 or 6 o'clock is the beginning time. So clients rise and they will start the Naikan practice immediately until 9 p.m. So they have to be sitting in the corner of the room behind the paper screen. So there is a sense of sensory deprivation. So people have to be sitting behind the screen corner, and they cannot speak to the other clients or leave the screen except for bathrooms. They even take 3 meals behind the screen. So there is no kind of a casual conversation or talking to anybody else. That is to promote this sort of inner looking attention. That is apparently the intention. And in terms of the Naikan practice, as I said, this is a form of the recollection practice. So clients are asked to remember their past year by year from early childhood to the present, regardless of any current problems they may have. Naikan practitioners always discourage from people dwelling on the current problems that they might have, and that's the reason they might be coming to Naikan. They say, well, you have this 1 week dedicated to Naikan. Please remember your past from the early phase up until now, systematically. So every 2 hours, clients are visited by the practitioner for a mensets interview during which they report on their self-examination thus far. So practitioner hardly actually gives any affirmative response. They pretty much listen in silence and thank for the Naikan the clients have been making. So it is not the really talk therapy the way people may think. So also this recollection must take place along prescribed lines. So clients choose a significant person in their life, usually starting with their mother. Then they recall their past in relation to that person along Naikan's 3 themes. Perhaps this fact that you're revisiting your past but in a relational context, in the eyes of the third person, is probably key to this Naikan method of recollection. And they have to also follow the specific 3 questions that is called Naikan 3 themes. You cannot do the free association. That is not how the Naikan is structured. So these 3 themes actually appear quite simple. Question 1, what have I received from this person? Question 2, what have I given back to the person? This is kind of, what you receive from the person and what you have done in return. It's kind of, give and take. Question 3, what troubles and difficulties have I caused this person? In some way is key to the Naikan question. Many clients, including myself, ask the question, okay, I get the sense of number 1 and 2. If you have number 3, what about question 4? Troubles other people cause me. The answer that was given to me was really clear and precise. Apparently, we are already experts remembering troubles people caused us. So no need to pay $600 and spend 1 week sitting 16 hours behind the screen to do what you already have done. That has been done already. The whole point of Naikan is kind of casting the light from the different angles that you otherwise would be able to do. So Naikan centers, there are about 40 Naikan centers in Japan, and there are some Naikan that are practiced at the hospitals. And as I said at the beginning of the talk, Naikan has been exported to countries like Germany, Austria, Spain, and there's even one center in the US. So if you're interested in doing Naikan, there's a place in the US, so you can do it in English. So I don't know whether you find this is a small, tight space. There's about 3 feet by 3 feet, but what I want you to pay attention is the fact that in one room, there are oftentimes multiple Naikan screens, meaning there are usually more than 2 people, up to 4 people who are doing Naikan in the same space. There is this idea about sharing space that is considered stimulating at the Japanese Naikan centers. This is the similar picture. I go over lightly. So this is when I visited the Naikan Center in Vienna. This was actually the first week of our honeymoon. So my husband, Brendan, still hasn't forgiven me for spending the first week of our honeymoon at the Naikan Center. Yes, it's kind of my trouble I caused my husband. And even worse, he speaks German, so Franz Ritter got so excited. Oh, you haven't done Naikan yet. You can sit and do Naikan. And I saw his expression kind of little bit frozen, but one of these days. So as you can see, there's some difference between the Naikan, a Japanese Naikan space and a Naikan space in Austria. Clients have individual rooms as opposed to the shared space. And even talking about the space itself, as opposed to this 3 feet by 3 feet, you have a little bit more space for actually, as a screen space. Franz Ritter told me, first of all, he was inspired by the monastic cells because that is much more familiar to Austrians. And where Austrians tend to be a little bit larger physically than Japanese, so 3 feet by 3 feet might not be quite large enough. That was a reason I was given. So this is a little bit dark, but we are demonstrating how the Naikan interview takes place. Nice yard, so clients can take a small walk when they need. So there is clearly, Naikan in cultural context, some modifications are mainly the use of the space and the use and the disuse of the recorded tapes. So as you already saw in the image, Japanese Naikan centers are always emphasizing the importance of having a shared space as it is considered better. So in some way, sometimes clients can listen to other clients' confessional narratives. I heard somebody sobbing in the middle of their confessional interview. And at the beginning, that bothered me, but eventually it stopped bothering me. And I almost found it actually stimulating or encouraging that I'm not alone doing this Naikan practice. There are other people. But in Austria, there are more kind of, valued sense of privacy, so that Franz Ritter created private rooms, but actually wall doesn't go up all the way, so there is a opening space at the top of each room, so actually each client can sense and kind of hear the presence of other clients as well. And at the Japanese Naikan centers, during 3 meals, oftentimes Naikan centers broadcast past Naikan clients' recorded confessional tapes. So because when people are eating, it is hard for them to be continuing Naikan. So that's how the Naikan practitioner in Japan came up. So why not just broadcasting some Naikan clients' actual interviews? And to me, occasionally I will listen to something and I think, oh, that is so true. My mother used to do these things, but I wasn't yet able to think about these issues. Maybe after lunchtime, I'll think about it. So overall, Japanese clients are positive about this. And many times, you are asked to have Naikan practitioner record your own Naikan confession. So I was also asked to do. And I said, yeah, that would be nice. I have actually recorded set on my own self-transformation process or non-self-transformation process. Either way, I can analyze myself later on. But Franz Ritter told me he tried it, but it turned out to be use of the tapes were not effective. Actually, Naikan clients all stood up and left their Naikan cell, right? So that means actually that is addressing and pointing to this issue of the privacy. So when you talk about therapeutic setting, especially psychotherapy, privacy is considered almost a norm. It is a kind of universal right for clients to have. And not to do so is almost like a violation of the privacy or human right. And yet, when you look at situations like places, Japan, in many non-Western cultures, probably the equivalence of psychotherapeutic practice are found in the form of religious self-cultivation or self-healing practices. Like meditation is a good example that oftentimes communal space is the norm, that case. So psychotherapy, is it a form of transformation or are they quite different? That is one question to be considered. Also, there is a clear kind of demarcation and a boundary between psychotherapy and religious practice in the West, meaning psychotherapy is something secular. But in this case, secular meaning it is not religious and all of that. But the case of actually Naikan, sometimes people say, is it like a Buddhist practice? And the answer is, it is taken from Buddhist philosophy, but there is no use of the term Buddha, or 3 questions have nothing of the Buddhist teaching. So how do we understand? Psychotherapy as secular. Is Naikan secular or what? So due to the time, so I'll hopefully have more discussion on this. So in terms of the continuity of the Naikan in cultural context, so Naikan's basic methods haven't changed. Both in Japan and outside of Japan. 3 themes haven't been touched at all or modified. And therapeutic process has been considered 1 week. And what is amazing is actually the kind of insights clients gain through Naikan. To me, actually, that was a key point because when I was writing up my dissertation at the time, I was suggested, why don't I write about Naikan practice as a Japanese culture-specific practice that is only applicable for Japanese, meaning there is something about Japanese psyche or Japanese culture. But more I learned about actually Austrian clients and American clients' experience of Naikan, that premise was challenged. So my ethnographic data challenged that kind of theory that is very popular in cultural anthropology. So now, let me see. There are 4 steps that clients seem to often follow during the Naikan self-transformation. The first change is actually not anything about the change notion about the client themselves, but actually the first change takes place in client's understanding of other people. I thought my mother is this kind of person, but by following the Naikan 3 themes, clients often remember, oh, my mother wasn't quite the person that I thought. So once actually your understanding or judgment of other people change, inevitably that challenges your own understanding of who you are. So that is the second stage, the changed perception of oneself. And once that happens, actually, there is a third step, which is the changed perception of one's illness or suffering. And lastly, there is a changed perception of one's surroundings and a change in the way the client reports to his or sensory experience. So I don't have much time to dwell onto the sensory experience, but this kind of first 72 hours, incredible physical discomfort, followed by almost no existence of knee pain. That is quite remarkable. Clients in Japan, clients in Austria often report first 3 days is so tough. Time goes very slowly. Your body is in pain, discomfort, but that disappears over time. So here, let me show you 4 case studies from Japan, Austria, and USA. So please feel free to guess which case study comes from which country. So case 1. As I dredged up specific memories of what I received from my mother in early childhood, the chocolate cake she made for my birthday, the gentle way she taught me to swim, I am filled with the palpable sense of appreciation. I feel more permeable, less armored. The idea of myself as solitary no longer plays. I can see my experience as an accumulation of layers, like colorful sedimentary rock, deposited through the acts of others, the act of nature. Which country? Germany, Austria? All right. This came from the US, American client. So, number 2, I always blame my mother for being the source of my anxiety neurosis. After my Naikan, I realized that I always received an infinite amount of love from her. It wasn't because of her, but rather because I only paid attention to the things she didn't do and grew in anger and dissatisfaction. That, as a result, I built up stress by myself and then became sick. Thanks to Naikan, I gained security, and since I am certain of the affection I receive now, I think I can finally live in the present. Due to the time, I will give the answer, Japan. Case study 3. The feeling of thankfulness for life and love, above all for family members, that filled me up is indescribable and wonderfully beautiful. Seeing in the long term, my life has changed step by step since that week. It was the beginning of a process of dissolving various problems, not always at the same tempo, but one that still continues without pause, a new beginning. So that came from a client in Austria. Case study 4. Up until now, I was convinced that I was living, but now I realize that I am lived, thanks to other people. Because of this, I've been able to rest with a happy and calm feeling. This morning when I woke up, I didn't feel that I woke up, but rather, oh, I still have life. I felt very happy. My body felt light. After I realized how much affection I received from my father, who is still alive, and realized that I was loved by him, and that I was very happy, I was able to feel calm, and so I was able to do Naikan in a calm and quiet mind. So anybody who knows anything about the language might be able to guess. This comes from Japan, actually. Yes. Well, I am lived is like ikasareteru. It's sort of commonly used. But still, actually, as you might have noticed, maybe there are some differences you are perhaps picking up, but at the same time, what you see is the increased sense of appreciation for what they have received, sense of gained security and connectedness. So after Naikan, so many Naikan clients become very creative, and they write poems and do drawings and painting. So Mr. Yanagita, one of the Naikan practitioners, is now showing this relational self that was drawn by one of his clients. So image in this is not clear, but the second image of the mandala that was also made by another Naikan client is quite powerful. The Buddha-like figure in the center is a Naikan client himself. The first layer, if you understand Japanese, is grandmother, grandfather, mother, father, sister. So the family members who are very close to him, and friends, and outer circle is actually strangers. It is quite amazing. It kind of showed the essence of Naikan in this one mandala, in which it took entire book for me to kind of describe what Naikan is about. So I had to ask the Naikan Center to give me the permission to use this image as a front cover of my book. So what is happening with Naikan is basically, when you talk about the long-term memory, you say it's memory, but it's actually a fixed, rigid, more like a static image that you have already. You don't even use a reflective thinking to tap onto that. So people have this sense of a life history, life story. This is my life. I have these family members, and this is who I am. But during Naikan, because they have to remember the past in a relational context, so that really start challenging this kind of fixed memory they already had. So at the beginning, there is a sharp difference between oneself and others. Once the client recognizes that immeasurability of what he or she has received from others, any sense of being a self-made person collapses. Basically, if you have a strong sense of I am a pretty independent, self-made man, then during the Naikan, you start remembering all the kindness you received. Just even the fact you're still alive means there have been so many people who fed you or kind of gave you a seat in the train. So we are always actually helped by strangers and people you know. So this I call actually the shifting from the ordinary perception, meaning this is a kind of usual I-centered perception. That is how we usually experience the world and reality and ourselves. But through Naikan, through gaining this relational insight into their life, they actually shift slightly from the ordinary perception to the other-centered perception. And that actually leads to the increased sense of gratitude and happiness, because they feel actually they have been supported by others. There is a sense of interconnectedness. When I studied Naikan practice research, I was told, oh, Naikan is a way of happiness by some Naikan practitioners. So I thought, I was a little skeptical, Naikan is a way of happiness. Yeah, you may be so happy after, release from this 1 week confined practice. But I came to realize, what this term happiness seems to be referring to is an increased sense of the connectedness, belonging, being accepted. So I don't think I have much time to talk about this, but doing this study of Naikan made me realize probably what is lacking among people who are suicidal are actually quite opposite of these post-Naikan clients' experiences. So I have done a little bit more quantitative research with Brendan Ozawa-de Silva and Corey Keyes, who is a sociologist, by using actually more quantitative measure to see whether actually my qualitative ethnographic finding actually resonate with the kind of quantitative numbers. So as you see, this is the before Naikan. Red is immediately after Naikan. Green is 3 months after Naikan. So the first 3 items, actually scales goes from 0 to 4. So you see actually these changes are quite significant, both emotional, social, and psychological well-being, meaning liking yourself, you find society makes sense, or you're kind to other people. All of these actually senses increased after Naikan. So as a conclusion, there is a sense that perhaps this kind of analytical form of mindfulness practices, such as Naikan and other forms that taps onto similar aspects, may be potentially a very beneficial preventative method for even suicidal prevention policies. And lastly, just last sentence, Naikan is definitely very much reflective of Japanese culture and its norms, but it also challenges Western cultural norms. This case, what do we mean by culture? Does culture mean geographically bound something? Or perhaps culture may mean the set of value system. There is a notion that if you think about guilt, you must feel depressed. There is this kind of immediate reaction I often get, but it is not necessarily empirically tested. With Naikan, people focus on troubles they cause others. They feel incredibly terrible about themselves, but that is a part of the process to realize the amount of the kindness they receive from others. So intense, depressed mood followed by kind of a amazing paradoxical happiness. That is a really interesting transformation process I kept noticing. Privacy as one. So anyway, so this is the end of my talk, and I look forward to more discussion. Thank you.